Chapter 1386, Narrow Path. Upon hearing Amon's "You're crazy," Klein raised his head and laughed out loud.
I just gave up according to your arrangements. It's just that it's more complete than you think.
As he spoke, an illusory brand appeared on the forehead of the ice-cold and bizarre mask he was wearing. It was a strange door of light that was tainted with bluish blackness. As for Klein, he was also enveloped in something similar. Under the translucent, dark-colored cloak, more and more slippery and sinister tentacles appeared. They were densely packed and extended until they occupied the nearby sky. As his dark eyes flashed, Klein looked at Amon and said with a smile,
For me, instead of you becoming the Lord of the Mysteries, wouldn't it be better if we let the past him revive?
After his mental state stabilized and he figured out the key to Amon's surprise attack, Klein's thoughts of giving up removed his resistance towards the Lord of the Mysteries' will in his body, allowing him to further revive. It was precisely because of this that he was able to control Sapphira Castle at critical moments and borrow the power of error to avoid the collapse of the space created by Amon. Without waiting for Amon's response, the corners of Klein's lips curled up as he said with a smile,
After you were corrupted by Sapphira Castle and showed signs of madness, you immediately recovered and could use Sapphira Castle to create the effects of blind stupidity. After releasing the suppression of the Lord of the Mysteries' will in you, you didn't enter a half-crazy state, as there are external powers helping you. You should have an extremely key important avatar. It might even be like Pelez's choice to lower his level. It's sleeping at Adam's place, and it allows a visionary like him to personally protect your mental state. As long as the awakening of the Lord of the Mysteries' will doesn't exceed the limits of what Adam can withstand, you won't go crazy here if you don't lose control there. Therefore, your most serious problem is that you have to maintain a normal connection with that body. Once it's interfered with, your condition will be in trouble. And this connection is actually very weak under Sapphira Castle's isolation effect. You deliberately showed a half-crazed state for two reasons. Other than luring me to find an opportunity in this direction and stepping on the trap you set up, you are also hiding this fact so that I won't be able to target this aspect while engaging in a battle with you. Of course, there are plenty of problems outside these ones. After all, you aren't fully prepared. If I had discovered these problems earlier, even if I was a king of angels with the uniqueness, there's no way for me to defeat you.
Amon listened quietly and raised his hand to adjust the crystal monocle in his right eye. The corners of his lips curled up as he let out a sigh with a smile. Upon seeing this, Klein smiled and shook his head.
You truly are powerful, cunning, and terrifying, truly worthy of the title of God of Deceit. If it wasn't for the fact that I had long considered what I would do when forced into a corner by you and had no other choice, I definitely would have hesitated just now. And if I hesitated slightly, I would have already died.
In that case, Amon would completely control Sapphira Castle, preventing Klein from returning from the fog of history for a resurrection. Amon stared at the increasing number of sinister tentacles extending out from under Klein's dark-colored cloak. He slowly took a deep breath and said with a smile,
The Lord of the Mysteries in you is about to truly awaken.
Klein's smile had a nerve-wracking feeling to it.
You can also compete with me on this point. Our next battle is very simple. It's a competition of who awakens the Lord of the Mysteries' will to a greater extent. A competition of whose control over Sapphira Castle is deeper. 50%, 70%, 90%, until we reach 100%. Then, with a bang, we explode and he returns. What do you think? Are you going to take the bet? Let's see who can't hold on any longer first. It's very thrilling, very interesting, and very suited to your preferences. It's like the roulette that's popular in FASAC. Two people, each having a revolver and a bullet inside. They take turns pulling the trigger at their temples. Whoever gives up first results in his opponent winning. And if no one gives up and persists until the end, there won't be a winner. He will be the winner.
Amon's brows pricked up as he smiled without saying a word. Klein looked at him and said with a smile,
Although you've always been pursuing thrills and are known to be a risk-taker, you achieve your goals most of the time. Not only do you not lose much, you often gain a lot. And in the few failures that you do experience, you only lose some of your avatars and some items. You've never suffered any serious injuries or been placed in a desperate situation. Your every action is a product of meticulous planning. Even if you fail, you will have a way out. Does this mean that you value your life more than I imagined? You do like thrills and seek it for pleasure, but to do so regardless of the price is just an image you portray. How can a real god of deceit wager a bet with himself at stake? Of course, this is just my own guess. Perhaps it's wrong. Anyway, do you want to take the bet?
Eamon stroked the crystal monocle and made a T-esque, like Medici.
You're really crazy.
Klein replied with a smile.
In the eyes of others, this is indeed insane. But to me, it's just a choice. Compared to you, I'm more willing to believe in the former Lord of the Mysteries. He is a true great old one, looking down on the universe from high above and treating most of the living beings as insects. This would make him distance himself from reality. Besides, I should still have time to get the genie to be my witness. I'll get the Lord of the Mysteries to promise me certain things. To him, it's very simple and worthless.
Having said that, the corners of Klein's mouth curled up as he said,
I won't lose too much, just myself. There are always some things that are more important than others.
Eamon maintained his smile but didn't say a word. Klein then surveyed the area and found the magic wishing lamp and Trunsoist brass book among the floating fragments of the wilderness. He immediately laughed out loud.
Look, I didn't get punished. This means that I'm not lying. I'm telling the truth.
In fact, the laws set up by the Trunsoist brass book had long been abolished since the Divine Kingdom was destroyed during the star's descent. Later on, the Ammons dared to attempt to use steel, but Klein's main goal wasn't to prove anything, but to show his determination, firmness, or perhaps madness. Of course, what he said was the truth. He was indeed willing to put them into practice. Otherwise, there was no way he could hide it from Eamon or exert enough pressure on him. Eamon smiled and said without a hint of panic,
Sounds interesting.
Isn't it? Let's begin.
Klein replied without hesitation as his eyes turned darker. Eamon's smile froze as his palms suddenly gathered together. Beneath his classical black robe, there were also slippery and sinister tentacles. His aura changed a little as his body seemed to have a dark cloak on it. At that moment, Eamon became more like the Lord of the Mysteries. However, he wasn't competing with Klein in the progression of the awakening of the Lord of the Mysteries. Instead, he was using this to deceive Saphira Castle to create a corresponding bug in creating a chance to escape. If the authority of the error were to take effect at the same level, it would often have different preconditions. First, the medium and target had to be similar enough. Second, there was a certain connection between the two. Third, there were certain logical contradictions between certain matters or objects. Fourth, some of the rules were indeed incomplete. Fifth, while not directly affecting the target, construct an erroneous environment as a divine kingdom. In this aspect, the restrictions of fooling were even fewer, but once an error satisfied the conditions, it would be difficult to defend against or terminate it. Eamon now wanted to take the initiative to disguise himself and satisfy the first category. This was similar to the invasion of a virus. First, it had to make the other party believe that they were on the same side to avoid detection, and then paralyze any defenses to achieve their respective goals. When a fruit looked like a strawberry, smelled like a strawberry, tasted like a strawberry, then it would basically be considered as a strawberry. But in reality, there might be an exception. At this moment, Eamon's appearance resembled that of the Lord of the Mysteries. His aura was like the Lord of the Mysteries, and his powers were like the Lord of the Mysteries. His mental imprint was also similar to the Lord of the Mysteries. With the authority of an error, it would naturally make Saphira Castle believe that he was the Lord of the Mysteries. Suddenly, Klein's damaged The Fool Divine Kingdom completely collapsed. The grand and ancient palace and the modeled table inside appeared. The grayish-white fog beneath Saphira Castle rose and enveloped the space. The grayish-white fog split into two waves. They clashed fiercely in a particular spot, producing vortexes one after another. They tore open a gap that led to reality. The power of Saphira Castle was at odds with itself in this second. It was as though it didn't know which Lord of the Mysteries to obey. Eamon's figure immediately vanished. using Dor's authority to rush out of Sapphira Castle. Just as he touched the edge, his body paused before being sent flying backward. At the Fool's Seat, the corners of Klein's lips curled up as he sat there. His glabella and the strange door of light around him became more obvious, as though they were corporeal. This released an immense convergence force that reached an unimaginable level. It was like an invisible hand that pulled Amon back. Amon's body suddenly split apart, transforming into countless selves, and in front of every Amon, an illusory astral door appeared. Silently, the astral doors opened at the same time. But in the endless darkness behind the doors, slippery and sinister tentacles appeared, blocking Amon's escape. At the tip of the tentacles, resplendent starlight lit up as they instantly enveloped the Amons. The Amons couldn't help but gather together, turning into a conceptual cluster. These concepts included, but weren't limited to, pointed hats, classical black robes, monocles, fate, time, keys, doors, bugs, and Trojan horses. Klein slowly stood up and smiled at the conceptualized Amon, who was now in a passive state.
You can also awaken the Lord of the Mysteries' will further, but this is different from death. It'll definitely affect the body at Adam's side.
A conceptualized Amon rapidly gained a physical form. He relied on the door authority to escape from his current state. The corners of his mouth curled into a smile, but he didn't respond to Klein. He seized this opportunity to use the error authority to deceive. Using an avatar outside that he had prepared ahead of time, it could be used to replace him and swap places with him. This was similar to the swapping of marionettes in the seer domain, but at this level the principles were different. It wouldn't be affected in most situations. However, Amon still failed. He realized that his error authority had been forcefully suppressed. As Klein slowly got up, more slippery and sinister tentacles appeared around him. The smile on his face became more exaggerated. Right on the heels of that, Amon's eyes glazed over and the smile on his face froze as the crystal monocle lost its luster. At the same time, the cold, bizarre mask on Klein's face squirmed. The blind stupidity effect. In the next second, he grafted himself to a certain concept in the cosmos, and he used his authority to influence the corresponding environment. The surrounding slippery tentacles aimed at Amon, like revolvers. In Amon's eyes that were still glazed over, a supernova exploded. An unimaginable sea of scorching light surged out, shattering his monocle and drowning his body. Chapter 1387, Method. Behind the endless curtain of darkness, in the darkness with aqueous light ebbing gently. A young man with black hair, black eyes, a broad forehead, and a thin face suddenly sat up as though he had experienced a nightmare. Dressed in a classic black robe, he stretched out his right hand, attempting to take out a crystal monocle from the void and wear it over his right eye. But this time he didn't obtain anything. His right hand paused in mid-air for 2 seconds before he retracted it and pinched the right eye rim. At this moment, he heard a gentle but emotionless voice.
To him, there's something more important than life. To you, apart from yourself, there's nothing worth caring about. When the matter develops to a point where one's life is put on the line, it would imply your loss.
The corners of Amon's mouth curled up as though he wanted to smile and reply, but he ultimately didn't say anything. The voice continued.
Born as a mythical creature, your lack of normal anchors is also a problem. This makes you know what courage and sacrifice are, but it's hard for you to understand.
Amon's expression changed as he stood up from the slightly glistening darkness. He looked at the human-skinned glove that was thrown to the side before, but seemed to be very happy. He retracted his gaze and curled the corners of his lips.
This seems very interesting. I plan to leave this place and enter the cosmos. That place is much more exciting than the real world. Perhaps I'll understand the 2 things you mentioned as a result of this.
That's very dangerous. Once you enter the cosmos, and before I succeed, I won't be able to provide any help. However, this will let you avoid him at least.
The calm and indifferent voice replied without any emotion. I, Chef, goal, Aemon didn't say another word. He raised his hand and pinched his right eye rim and vanished from the endless shadow screen. In the ancient palace above the fog, as Aemon was completely obliterated under the power of a supernova, Klein couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. If he had a choice, he naturally didn't want to sacrifice himself to revive the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings. He hoped to personally protect this world and seek out the meaning of life again. Of course, if he didn't have a choice, he wouldn't hesitate to awaken the celestial worthy. He was certain that he could do this, and Aemon was also aware of this. Therefore, he didn't force him, and only attempted to escape. In the battle just now, it had developed into a battle of courage towards the end. The one who wasn't afraid of true death would yield the absolute advantage. Clearly, Aemon wasn't prepared to sacrifice himself for this matter. After heaving a sigh of relief, Klein's face under the cold and bizarre mask suddenly grimaced. Under his translucent, dark-colored cloak, the slippery and sinister tentacles that extended out were either hitting the ground or rising up high. It was completely out of his control. He could feel that the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings in his body was rapidly waking up, and it seemed like he couldn't stop it. Even if Klein directly died with his will and relied on the powers of a miracle invoker to revive, he wouldn't be able to escape, as the Lord of the Mysteries also wielded the authority of miracles. At that moment, Klein recalled the words of Dark Angel Sazrir, which was also from the ancient sun god.
The primordial one had awoken in my body.
In the next second, at the spot where Amon's body had shattered, beams of light were pulled by a vague, invisible form of gravity as they charged towards Klein. Some were worms of time with 12 rings, some were insects made of resplendent starlight, while some were just large numbers of light dots. Klein wanted to stop the Beyonder characteristics from fusing with him, but the increasingly powerful celestial worthy's will prevented him from succeeding. His body swelled into a balloon and then suddenly became thin as paper. This repeated itself in an endless loop. Die, 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 die. The mask on his face became brighter and more bizarre. The slippery and evil tentacles that extended out from under his cloak increased and became more uncontrollable. One Worm of Time Beyonder characteristic, one Key of Star Beyonder characteristic, and one. Klein's mind felt like he was being devoured by an invisible monster, producing excruciating pain. Finally, a pair of eyes, which seemed to be formed from pure starlight, formed from layers of illusory doors and crystal monocles, rushed towards Klein's face, straight for the mask's eye sockets. Almost at the same time, the strange door of light that was tainted with bluish blackness appeared on Klein's body again. Sapphira Castle! At that moment, Klein, Sapphira Castle, Door's uniqueness, and Error's uniqueness all had a strong inclination to congregate. Once they fused together, the Lord of the Mysteries would completely awaken and complete his resurrection process. Klein suddenly used his right hand to cover half of his face. His entire body bent down as if he was fighting with another self. With the anchoring and image disruption from his anchors, Klein finally slowed down the awakening of the Lord of the Mysteries' will, reducing the power of convergence by a little. The starlight eyes and the crystal monocle stopped in front of Klein's face, floating only a few centimeters in the air, like planets revolving around the sun. Klein believed that he couldn't maintain this extreme imbalance for too long. Perhaps a few minutes or even dozens of seconds later, the convergence would continue without restraint, bringing about an unbearable change.
Haha, this can be considered a form of fusion.
Klein laughed in an unstable manner. Then he fooled the Trunsoist brass book, allowing it to enter a sealed state and fly into the junk pile. Right on the heels of that, Klein left Sapphira Castle and arrived in the astral world formed from symbolism and authority. See, this place seemed similar to the cosmos. It was dark and vast, but in fact, there were many unique aspects to it. For example, even though there was a sun-like star hanging in the distance, emitting normal light and heat, if one tried to get close to it, without getting injured, one would realize that the astral world there was like a black curtain. The sun was directly painted with pastel colors, and there were a bunch of concepts and symbols surrounding it. Furthermore, the drawing of the sun wasn't that nice, like a child without any foundation in art casually scrawled about. It was both comical and frightening. From another perspective, this might be a manifestation of the chaos and madness that underlay everything. Esai, Chapida. As soon as Klein entered, he immediately sensed invisible gazes. Some of them came from areas protected by the world barrier, while others came from broader areas with obvious malice. The corners of Klein's mouth couldn't help but curl up. He suddenly turned his head and looked outside the world barrier, raising his slippery and sinister tentacles. This pair of eyes that seemed forged from starlight and the crystal monocle also moved. All of a sudden, all the attention from the cosmos shrank back. Only the hand-drawn crimson moon was left hanging there as it flashed with light.
Haha.
Klein laughed as he came to a dark kingdom filled with night vanilla and slumber flowers. At the same time, the Evernight goddess appeared at the borders of the divine kingdom in a layered, star-speckled dress. Her face was covered in a translucent black veil. She didn't transform into her giant form as she looked at him at eye level before raising her right hand and revealing the bird-shaped golden accessory. At the head of the bird-shaped golden accessory, a series of illusory doors appeared in the bronze-like eyes, allowing a drop of colorless water that had a strong aura of eternal stillness to land on Klein's cold and bizarre mask. The will of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings entered a state of eternal slumber. Likewise for a majority of Klein's consciousness. All he had was a tiny bit of lucidity. Under such circumstances, he made the mask retract, and he transformed the cloak into a black windbreaker. Then he made the crystal monocle turn into a pair of black gloves, making the eyes forged from starlight to turn into a cane inlaid with star speckles. This was only a change in appearance, but it didn't change anything in reality. Once the two items were separated from Klein, they would return to their original state. Of course, if Klein stabilized himself, he could accommodate them and change their corresponding concepts and symbols over and over again, allowing them to change their forms forever.
This can't be sustained for too long. It just delays the matter for a while.
The Evernight goddess gently reminded him,
If the river of eternal darkness's water is used repeatedly, the Lord of the Mysteries will awaken even faster. This is because he will trigger some unknown changes and adjust his condition. Similarly, the specialness of Saphira Castle and my blessing will gradually be erased, allowing you to enter a state of eternal slumber.
It was as though Klein wasn't discussing his own matters. He smiled and nodded.
Got it.
The Evernight goddess said in a tone that seemed to be comforting Klein's psyche.
Regarding this matter, the method Amon used and the actions he did had exceeded my expectations. He is indeed the true god of deceit. It's not that you have no chance at all in what comes next. You can first try to completely control Saphira Castle and pull the will of the Lord of the Mysteries to enter a state of eternal slumber. In the dream, you can resist and fuse with him. I can bless you, but the most important thing is still left to you. Becoming a great old one doesn't have any rituals involved. No ritual can change the awakening of the primordial one's will, but the ancient sun god believes that the order to accommodate them can increase one's self-awareness to a certain extent, increasing the success rate of the matter. First, become a sequence 0 of a pathway. Then control and fuse with the Saphira. Only then do you accommodate the other uniquenesses. That's the best order. Become a dual pathway true god. And then, controlling and fusing with a Saphira is an order that isn't good or bad. Only fusing with a Saphira at the final step will be the worst choice.
Klein smiled and said,
That's a good idea. As long as one wakes up, a Lord of the Mysteries will be born. This might be him or me. Yes, after completely controlling Saphira Castle and entering a state of eternal slumber, I should be able to weaken the seal of the Western continent, creating a weak spot that allows one to enter and exit.
The Evernight goddess didn't say a word when she heard Klein's words. Klein continued smiling.
This is my choice. I had anticipated this day a long time ago. I will finally face him.
Chapter 1388, A Sudden Gathering. The Evernight goddess nodded and didn't say anything else. She reached out her palm and grabbed a corner of the void and tugged lightly. A thin layer of a night curtain gently floated down, covering Klein's body as it silently seeped in. Klein silently took in the blessings from the dream for 2 seconds. He pressed his hand to his chest and bowed. He took 2 steps back and left the astral world. The Evernight goddess stood at the borders of the divine kingdom as she watched him leave. In the next second, Klein landed in the projection of the giant king's court, in the ruins of the Battle of Gods. Then, like Aemon, he walked to the edge of the grayish-blue door and raised his hand to create a blue illusory door. Through the door, Klein entered the forsaken land of the gods. Following the guidance of fate, he wandered straight to the peak of a mountain range. There was a huge crucifix erected there, one covered with a faint shadow. Klein stared at the shadow for a few seconds before sighing slightly. He bent down and picked up an ancient silver mirror that was placed near the huge cross. Then he turned around and vanished from the forsaken land of the gods. At the same time, the Worms of Spirit, who didn't need to be on duty in Sapphira Castle, informed him of Queen Mystic's current location. Klein raised his hand and took out the magic wishing lamp from the junk pile. Using the ownership connection between it and Bernadette, he used another wand ring to appear on a rather hidden island where Emerald City was. Bernadette was flipping through the latest album catalog from Intis. Just as she sensed something, she saw Gehrman's sparrow hand her the magic wishing lamp. Klein said in a very normal voice,
Thank you.
Bernadette pursed her lips as though she wanted to say something, but at that moment, her eyes flashed as though she had seen something and prophesied something. Hence, she silently reached out and took the magic wishing lamp. Klein then took out a metal cigar case that had signs of corrosion on its surface.
This is your payment.
Even without the eye of mystery prying, Bernadette could sense that the iron cigar case was extraordinary. She could roughly guess what kind of corrosion had happened to it. However, she didn't choose to accept it because of that reason, but she suddenly felt that she had no reason to reject it. She hesitated for a moment before taking the iron cigar case. If he was still in a rather crazy state like before, Klein definitely would have smiled and said in an exaggerated manner the moment Bernadette hesitated,
This is a gift from Uncle. Take it.
But now, he was only left with that last bit of lucidity. He had to put in a lot of effort to prevent himself from falling asleep and not having the impulse to act like a clown. After leaving Bernadette's Emerald City, Klein seized the opportunity to wander to Backland, to Dr. Aaron Sirius's home. Will Septon, who was sitting in a pile of toys, raised his head and looked at Dwayne Dantes in front of him. His tears suddenly streamed down as he choked.
I finally feel the opportunity.
He was referring to the opportunity for accommodating the Fate Pathway's uniqueness. Klein squatted down and said without any expression,
I am here to help you accommodate it. I'll steal your childhood and youth and allow you to instantly grow up. Then, by relying on a level of above the sequences, but below that of a great old one, I'll forcefully help you to accommodate the die of probability. Of course, that alone won't be enough. It will require an additional fooling and use of a bug.
The tears that Will Septon dripped down suddenly stopped. He muttered in astonishment.
So the two choices are actually the same.
Typically speaking, the accommodation of a pathway's uniqueness required one to be naturally born with it, seek an existence at the level of a great old one to help, or rely on a simplified advancement ritual to complete it. There was no other possibility. The Snake of Fate, Will Septon, clearly wasn't born with the uniqueness and only had the two options left to consider. His focus had been on holding a simplified ritual, which was to wait for the opportunity of fate. Who knew that this opportunity was actually when Klein was approaching the level of a great old one? In essence, it was the second method. With this in mind, the chubby child, Will Septon, cried even harder. He felt as though he had been deceived by fate. Klein ignored Will's crying.
Let the life school of thought's demigod send over the die of probability. Normally, with your luck, the die of probability should be by your side. Let's begin as soon as possible. I don't have much time left.
Will stopped and looked at Klein for a moment before he said, slightly choking,
Forget it, let's wait for the next opportunity. Given your current state, it would be a huge burden for you to forcibly help me accommodate it. Perhaps you would lose control on the spot. I don't want to face the Lord of the Mysteries. Okay, next time. I have a premonition.
With that said, Will looked into Klein's eyes and said,
I have a feeling that the next opportunity will be better.
Klein maintained his reverie-like expression as he said in a low voice.
Is this a prophecy?
Will Alsepton's tears flowed again.
No, it's a blessing.
Klein nodded slightly, stood up, and took a step back. During this process, his figure gradually faded away and soon disappeared. He returned to Sapphira Castle and sat on the high-backed chair, allowing the grayish-white fog to envelop him. After surveying the area and confirming the states of the crimson stars, Klein leaned back in his chair in exhaustion and slightly raised his right hand. This time, he didn't create the fake world again. On the two sides of the long mottled table, crimson beams of light shot out at the same time, freezing into the members of the Tarot Club, the Hanged Man, the Sun, the Hermit, the Magician, and the rest. This sudden gathering was clearly beyond Audrey's and company's expectations. It left them surprised and alarmed. Before that, although they had come to Mr. Fool's Divine Kingdom on occasions that weren't a Monday afternoon, it was all planned. They knew in advance that they would be dragged here. They would have either applied for a mini-gathering in advance, avoid the full moon ravings, or treat Mr. World with psychological problems. It could be said that, apart from the first time, this was the second time they were summoned by Mr. Fool without any warning. This made even the slowest members of the club catch the hint of uneasiness and feel the air freeze. Thinking back to the World Gairman Sparrow's visit and the words of Mr. Fool's Blessed, Audrey, Alger, and Shio simultaneously had similar thoughts.
Is it finally here?
Audrey subconsciously turned her head and looked down at the bottom end of the long mottled table. There was no one there. Although she was already mentally prepared, Audrey couldn't help but be stunned, as emotions of uncontrollable sadness surged within her. In her heart, the World Gairman Sparrow's image had long since turned from a crazy adventurer and an extremely dangerous beyonder to a person who wore a cold and tough facade, but was a gentle, powerful, loving, mysterious, and lonely man who was burdened with many friends on his back. She believed that amongst the Tarot Club members, she knew the world the best apart from Mr. Star. And now, this friend seemed to have encountered some misfortune, leaving behind only an empty seat. The Tarot Club lost its first official member. Leonard suddenly felt a little flustered.
Where did Klein go?
In this world, he was the only one he could befriend. Previously, when Klein suddenly appeared in the southern continent and threw the gold coin into the cathedral's donation box, Leonard had already had a strange premonition. He had the feeling that Klein was about to receive the judgment of fate and was bidding farewell to the past. This was the same as the time back in Tingen, when they decided to step out together and face Magose.
Old man's recent silence has been a little bizarre. Could something really have happened to Klein with Mr. Fool's level and status? As long as there's a chance, he should be able to be saved.
Leonard's heart tightened as he suddenly turned his body and cast his gaze at Mr. Fool at the top end of the long mottled table. This mighty existence was still enveloped by the grayish-white fog, preventing others from seeing his condition. At this moment, Imlin, Catalea, and Derek also discovered Mr. World's absence. Coupled with the suddenness of this gathering, they were both shocked and puzzled. They didn't know what had happened, but their instincts told them that it wasn't a good thing. As a clairvoyant who had recently advanced, Catalea even felt that there was a certain problem with Mr. Fool. Fours was also somewhat alarmed, inevitably having a strong fear due to some unknown change.
Mr. World isn't here. Shio had previously mentioned that Mr. Fool and his few blessed were about to face a major challenge, and it's very likely that they would suffer a bad fate.
She had once thought that she would sigh in relief because of Mr. World's disappearance, but from the looks of it, it wasn't like that. Instead, she found her heart heavy and a little horrified. Only then did she realize that at some point in time, the world had become the pillar of support for the Tarot Club outside of Mr. Fool. It made everyone feel at ease when they saw him. Of course, some fear was unavoidable. As Justice Audrey and company turned around and looked at the top end of the long modeled table, Klein, who was already the real fool, said in a low voice,
This is a last-minute gathering.
Audrey, who sensed this, felt her heart tighten.
Mr. Fool is very exhausted.
She looked around and stood up as usual. After the members of the Tarot Club stood up one after another, Audrey lifted the ends of her skirt with a heavy heart and curtsied at the end of the long modeled table.
Good afternoon, Mr. Fool.
Chapter 1389, The Fool's Commission. Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. The other members of the Tarot Club appeared rather solemn as they followed Miss Justice's usual greeting. After they sat down again, the Fool Klein surveyed the area and slowly said,
I will be entering a state of slumber.
Upon hearing this, Alger, Audrey, Shio, and Fours felt like their speculations had finally been confirmed. Leonard, Emlyn, Derek, and the other Tarot Club members felt their hearts sink as they became increasingly flustered and filled with puzzlement. Of course, they weren't that surprised. The abnormal last-minute gathering and the abnormality of the world's absence seemed to indicate that something important had happened today. Klein maintained his last bit of clarity and said in his previous tone,
This involves a war that's at the level of above the sequences. It has something to do with the apocalypse to a certain extent.
Indeed. Alger acutely caught the words above the sequences. He had long suspected that there was another level above sequence 0, the one occupied by the ancient sun god when he had 8 kings of angels. Now, Mr. Fool had finally confirmed his guess and resolved many of his doubts. Catalea and company also noticed the hidden message in Mr. Fool's words. Those who had similar guesses, like the hanged man, felt enlightened, while the ones who had never had such guesses were inevitably surprised and confused when they heard it. However, they quickly combined what they had learned from the past and came to a realization. Mathe, the Fool Klein continued.
Only after you become an angel do you have the right to know the exact situation. Otherwise, just understanding it will bring corruption.
This made the Tarot Club members think of the words underground and cosmos. They were momentarily unable to contain their thoughts. Klein looked at the end of the long modeled table and said,
My blessed, the world, has entered a deep slumber. It's unknown when he will wake up.
Leonard nearly blurted out.
Then what should be done?
But he could clearly sense that Mr. Fool hadn't finished his sentence. Therefore, he forcefully held back his urge. The Fool Klein swept his gaze across him.
Next is a long-term commission for all members. Spread my name more widely, but don't clash with the Orthodox churches. When necessary, you can choose to use a more concealed method to proselytize. This will aid in my awakening. Also, spread the news of the world being my blessed, and record it in the Church's Holy Bible. Of course, do not include information that involves his personal information. Remember one sentence. The awakening of the world spells the fool's return.
Klein wanted to increase his number of anchors. This might be useful in the battle with the Lord of the Mysteries in his dream. At the same time, he wanted to mold the world into a saint of the Church of the Fool, an angel beside the divine throne, so that this image could also greatly share an image with the believers and obtain his own anchors. To put it simply, Klein planned on having a believer contribute 2 sets of anchors. After all, to him, be it the fool or the world, all of them were just an identity of his. Furthermore, the image created by anchors wouldn't be uniform. They were different and wouldn't affect him. At the level of the fool, the Church would spread the name of the deity, the fool's sacred emblem, and all kinds of religious teachings without any concrete images. As for the world, he had quite a number of identities, such as Guillermin Sparrow, Duane Dantes, and Merlin Hermes. It wouldn't fixate on a single image. The Fool Klein said, without a change in tone.
The reward is the convenience you have enjoyed in the past, the responses you received, and the corresponding help given to your future prayers. After I begin my slumber, I can still respond to my prayers in a certain way, but not every time. If there's something very important that needs help, pray a few more times.
He could tell from Antigonus's state of eternal slumber that dreams could be projected outside. As long as the correct method was used, a sleeping deity could make use of the dream to a certain extent to respond to prayers. Regarding this situation, the members of the Tarot Club weren't stumped by it at all. On the one hand, most of them were either openly or secretly spreading the faith of the Fool. On the other hand, it was very common to pray to deities without receiving a response. Mr. Fool's responses from before were considered extremely rare. They had almost never heard of anything like this happening elsewhere. To be able to receive a response through repeated prayers on important matters was better than most of the clergymen of the Orthodox churches. The Tarot Club members didn't hesitate at all as they accepted the long-term commission.
Yes, Mr. Fool.
Among them, Leonard was the one that answered from the bottom of his heart. He was most eager and impatient. To him, spreading the faith and biblical canon of Mr. Fool was to awaken Klein. This made him instantly find the motivation to do something else other than his usual work. At this moment, the Fool Klein nodded slightly and cast his gaze at Catalia.
The previous commission, to gather all the information regarding the hidden sage suddenly coming to life, is still effective. If you wish to take the risk, then go further and investigate the present state of the hidden sage. This will be very dangerous. You can reject it, and the reward is a wish.
Catalia thought for a moment and said,
Honorable Mr. Fool, is this related to awakening you? Is it related to surviving the apocalypse?
Perhaps, perhaps not. I can't give you a definite answer right now. I just see some visions.
This time, Klein didn't deliberately create a high-level persona of the Fool, because he was already the Fool.
Also, watch over all your subordinates that are beyonders of the Earth and Moon pathway.
Catalia fell silent for a moment before slowly saying,
I'll accept this commission.
The Fool Klein cast his gaze to the other side and said to Derek,
Your mission is to protect the new city of Silver and New Moon City and protect the Rorstead Archipelago. The more believers I have and the safer they are, the higher the chances of me waking up. On this foundation, think about how to expand the church and spread the faith. Your payment is to become my blessed.
Derek's eye suddenly burned as he recalled the encouraging gaze he had received from the chief when he pushed open the final door of the Giant King's court. He took a deep breath and said in a firm tone,
Yes, Mr. Fool.
Klein nodded and looked at Fours.
You need to protect the Abraham family well to prevent them from suffering the temptation of the cosmos. Also, gather more information regarding the fourth epoch and figure out Mr. Door's condition at that time. Uncover some of the latent problems of the Abraham family.
Fours hesitated for a moment, but she still expressed that she would do such things even if she wasn't given the commission.
That's something I wish to do.
The Fool Klein didn't give his approval or disapproval. Instead, he said,
If you're willing, you can write down biographies and stories of the world's different identities using different aliases. The reward for above is that when you have a chance of becoming a planeswalker and have to head to the cosmos, you will receive my blessings.
Although Klein knew that he could use a dream to give a response to a certain extent in his sleep, he wasn't sure if he was the one who had the upper hand or the Lord of the Mysteries. Therefore, he wished to use verbal contracts of providing a reward after the completion of a mission on more important matters. When the time came, even if he was at a disadvantage, he would be able to make use of this sort of invisible promise to give an ingenious response. Fours was taken aback.
Planeswalker?
To be frank, she had never considered this problem before. What she was worried about was the digestion of the secret sorcerer potion and the wanderer ritual. Soon she composed herself and said,
Yes, Mr. Fool.
Klein then cast his gaze at Emlyn.
The besiegement of the Rose School of Thought involves preparations for the apocalypse. It's rather dangerous. Even if an angel is participating in it, you have to pay attention to your own safety. Your commission is to try your best to gather blessings, auras, and items given by the primordial moon to her believers in the Rose School of Thought. These might be more dangerous than a Grade 1 sealed artifact.
At that moment, although Klein still maintained the fool's tone, there were hints that resembled a friend's warning. This made Audrey, who had stabilized her initial mental state, sense something different. Recalling what Mr. Fool had said to the other members, she sighed inwardly.
Mr. Fool's humanity seems to have become richer, just as he is about to enter a deep sleep.
While Emlyn was slightly surprised and puzzled, Klein continued.
Apart from participating in the besieging of the Rose School of Thought's mission, I hope that you can form a pharmaceutical company and perform research on how to mass-produce the medicine with magical effects.
Emlyn replied instinctively.
If it's mass-produced, there's no way the products can be equipped with a magical effect.
The fool Klein nodded.
Seek out a compromise. Your main goal is to spread my name through this pharmaceutical company. The reward will also be a wish.
Emlyn mumbled inwardly.
This isn't a matter of danger, but whether it's possible. The simplest solution is to give me 1,000 apothecary potions. I can form an apothecary factory for mass production.
Before replying seriously.
Yes, Mr. Fool.
Klein looked to the other side and said to CO.
The apocalypse is approaching. Be it the Red Priest or the Demoness pathways, they will become active. Your mission is to rely on the official factions to investigate the whereabouts of the 3 Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics and the uniqueness of the Red Priest pathway. If there's a chance, find a clue to confirm the primordial demoness's present condition. It's very dangerous.
Klein didn't mention the payment because he had already paid for it. Yai had her wish fulfilled by holding a ritual and becoming a Sequence 4 imperative mage. As for the 3 Sequence 1 Conqueror Beyonder characteristics of the Red Priest pathway, Klein had previously learned that one was in the hands of the Sauron family, the former Intis royal family, the other in the hands of the Phasax Einhorn royal family, and the other was in the hands of the Loans Augustus royal family. Later, as a reward, it was given to the Demoness sect. Of course, this was only a preliminary answer. The corresponding situation could very well have changed. The Sauron family had already been in decline since Roselle's era. It might not necessarily be able to keep the Conqueror's Beyonder characteristic or corresponding sealed artifact under its control. Klein even suspected that it might have been obtained by the Iron and Blood Cross Order. The failure of the war had significantly damaged the Einhorn family. Klein didn't rule out the possibility of the death of a high-level angel, or the loss of a Grade 0 sealed artifact. The location of the Conqueror Beyonder characteristic that the Augustus family gave to the Demoness sect was currently the clearest. However, Klein knew that the Red Angel evil spirit, Sauron Einhorn Medici, had been eyeing it all this time. Perhaps he had succeeded, or perhaps he was carrying out whatever plans he had. There were no clues to the corresponding Red Priest uniqueness at the moment. The last time the mysterious world knew of it was at the end of the 4th epoch, during the Pale Disaster. Chapter 1390, Questions and Answers. Yio had always been looking forward and uneasy as to what her mission was. She looked forward to it because she had already chosen to accept Mr. Fool's gift, so she definitely had to pay the corresponding price. Knowing the mission earlier allowed her to prevent unnecessary second-guessing due to the unknown, guesses that only led to greater fear. She was uneasy because she knew that the remuneration she received was too generous. She believed that the final mission wouldn't be simple and would definitely be filled with danger. At that moment, after hearing Mr. Fool's words, her heart finally settled. At the same time, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Investigating the 3 Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics and the uniqueness of the Red Priest pathway and their locations, and even confirming the present state of the primordial demoness was indeed very dangerous. It was a mission that would result in a terrifying corruption if she wasn't careful, but it was at least better than snatching the uniqueness and Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics or directly facing the primordial demoness. If it were the latter, even with the official factions supporting her, CO didn't think that she could accomplish it. All she could do was write a will, ready to sacrifice herself at any moment. And if it was just the former, she could use a more roundabout method to obtain the information. She didn't need to encounter powerful existences with high statuses. As a Sequence 4 demigod, Shio was confident. Without any hesitation, she immediately replied,
Yes, Mr. Fool.
The fool Klein had planned on looking to the other side. After some consideration, he added,
Be careful of Banzi.
Without waiting for the Tarot Club members to start making connections, Klein said to Leonard,
Your mission is similar to the moon's. During the besiegement of the Rose School of Thought, gather blessings, auras, and items from the Mother Tree of Desire from their members. It's equally dangerous.
He only gave a single warning, without saying as much as he did like, when he gave Emlyn the mission. This was because Leonard had a senior angel from the Marauder pathway parasitizing him. He knew many secrets and knew how dangerous the outer deities were. He wouldn't allow Leonard to act recklessly. Seeing that Leonard was about to nod, the fool Klein maintained his tone and continued.
You don't have to do too much in promoting my name. You can even choose not to do it.
As one of the 22 high-ranking members of the Church of Evernight, as one of the few high-ranking deacons of the Nighthawks, it was very easy for something to happen if Leonard spread the faith of the fool in private. He would be misunderstood by his colleagues and cause unnecessary conflicts. Miraculously, to Klein, the Moon Emlyn's actions didn't seem to be misunderstood in the same way. To the people and sanguine around him, anything he did wasn't too strange. That's right. Leonard had already recovered from his previous eagerness and realized the cruelty of reality. However, he still wanted to do something. At this moment, the fool Klein added,
You can share the stories of the world with songs and poetry.
Songs and poetry. Leonard instinctively frowned. He didn't immediately respond to Mr. Fool. Klein then said,
Other than that, try your best to raise your own level to prepare for the apocalypse. The reward for all the missions is a wish.
Although many Beyonder characteristics had fallen into the real world when the god of combat died, bringing with them a batch of Beyonder creatures, mutated monsters, and abnormal lands, Klein didn't know how many Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics the Evernight goddess had obtained from the warrior pathway, other than the uniqueness, but at the very least, a number of the Sequence 2 angels of the Church of Evernight had the possibility of becoming a Sequence 1 angel. At the same time, if they had obtained additional Beyonder characteristics, they could still switch to the corresponding sequence of the death pathway. This would open a path for the saints to advance, not limiting them to just one pathway. Of course, not every Sequence 3 saint wished to become an angel, but Leonard was currently only a Sequence 4 Night Watcher. Furthermore, if the corresponding Sequence 3 Horror Bishop position was limited, he could consider Silver Knight and Ferryman. Klein had one set of the former. Leonard fell silent for 2 seconds before he slowly exhaled.
Yes, Mr. Fool.
The fool Klein immediately cast his gaze at Miss Justice, who had been waiting.
Apart from promoting my name, you have 2 missions. One is to assist judgment and investigate the whereabouts of the Red Priest pathway's uniqueness and Sequence 1 Beyonder characteristics, confirming the present state of the primordial demoness. The other is to work hard to raise your level.
One of the missions is to increase my sequence.
Audrey was somewhat puzzled about this mission. In her opinion, this seemed to be telling an ordinary person, your mission is to earn even more money.
Furthermore, this isn't of any value to Mr. Fool. Could it be that he wants me to treat Mr. World?
Just as this thought flashed across Audrey's mind, the fool Klein added,
The higher your sequence, the more opportunities you have to awaken the world. In this aspect, you can make use of external forces to help. The psychology alchemist that Hermes rebuilds will be one of the choices, but you need to be careful and take precautions. You have to pay a certain price for this. You can give up the reward you received before. This depends on your will and thoughts.
Audrey no longer had any doubts. After a moment of silence, she nodded solemnly.
Yes, Mr. Fool.
Klein's gaze landed on Algier.
You will know what your mission is in time to come.
Klein had already foreseen the corresponding scene. Without waiting for Alger to speak, he continued,
You can bring the sea god scepter, but during this period of time, all the prayers of the sea god believers will be transferred to the sun, directly pointing at me.
Although Alger still couldn't accurately guess what his mission was, he already had a vague premonition. After a moment of thought, he replied in an upright manner.
Yes, Mr. Fool.
Klein retracted his gaze and looked around before slowly saying,
After this, on the first Monday afternoon of every month, you can still gather here, but there will be no convener. If you need to do a private, mini-discussion, pray in advance and wait for a response.
At this point, the fool Klein closed his eyes and said,
Let us end today's gathering here.
The Tarot Club members couldn't help but feel a baffling sense of sorrow. It was as though a grand ball was coming to an end. They stood up at the same time and solemnly bowed towards the end of the long mottled table.
Your will is our will.
Klein waited until they finished speaking before he dispelled his control of them. He watched as the crimson starlight scattered and quickly fell. After staring at the scene for a few seconds, he conjured a yellowish parchment and a dark red fountain pen. After some thought, Klein simply wrote,
Dear Mr. Azek, due to some complicated reasons, I might be sleeping for a long time. I'm sorry, but I might not be able to write a letter to you for a long time.
With just that sentence, Klein stopped and made the pen disappear. Although he had conjured that piece of paper, with his current status, level, and strength, he could sustain it for more than 100 years, even if it was brought to the outside world. He closed his eyes again, summoned Azek's copper whistle, and blew it. At the same time, he released some of the restrictions that came from Saphira Castle. The skeleton messenger appeared, and every bone in its body trembled intensely, as if it would collapse at any moment. If not for the letter that Klein had handed over, it might have prostrated itself. After the skeleton messenger received the letter and left Saphira Castle in a hurry, Klein rubbed his temples. This wasn't because the will of the celestial worthy had already escaped from his state of eternal slumber, nor was it because of the pain from maintaining his lucidity. It was just a habit. Klein slowly leaned back into his chair and sighed. On both sides of the long, mottled table, Justice Audrey, the hanged man Alger, the sun Derek, the magician Fors, the moon Emlyn, the hermit Catalea, the star Leonard, and Judgment Shio appeared in the order they joined the Tarot Club. But this time, they weren't real. They were only projections. They no longer appeared blurry, revealing their images from Klein's memory. Soon after, more figures appeared. They were a mature man with a receding hairline with deep eyes, a beautiful witch with blue eyeshadow and red blush, a middle-aged man with black hair mixed with silver hair, his voice unusually loud and sonorous, a woman in her late 40s with ear-length short hair, a youth that gamed on his phone while eating delicacies, a happy young lady who kept giggling, a civil servant who looked old than his age with a high hairline, a young girl dressed in an old-fashioned skirt who focused on machinery. They either sat or stood, gathering beside the people they knew. In the flickering candlelight on the long table, they discussed different things, followed the music, and danced. Klein silently watched the lively scene as his expression gradually softened. After an unknown period of time, he stood up, passed through them, and walked into the depths of this space. Behind him, the figures, the candlelight, and the music faded away and disappeared. When he saw the strange door of light above the grayish-white cloud, Klein beckoned for the magic mirror, a rose. At that moment, the transparent or opaque worms and insects that clustered together to form spherical lights in the strange door of light turned bluish-black. It was like a thick layer of fog that made one unable to see what was behind the door. After Klein arrived, he didn't immediately enter. He felt as though there was an extremely terrifying monster behind the door, waiting to devour him. He raised his head and looked at the transparent cocoons hanging above the door of light. He looked at the modern humans with different skin colors inside the cocoons. Closing his eyes to sense them, Klein raised his right hand and closed his 5 fingers. The cocoons cracked open as the people inside transformed into specks of light. They flew out of Saphira Castle and landed in the real world, into the bodies of those who had just died. After doing this, Klein lowered his head and looked at the magic mirror in his hand.
Are you scared?
The aqueous light on the surface of the ancient silver mirror swirled and the pale words outlined itself.
No.
In the next second, Arodes raised his own question according to the rules.
Great Master, are you afraid?
The corners of Klein's mouth twitched.
Yes.
With that said, he took a step forward with the magic mirror in hand and walked towards the bluish-black fog in the middle of the strange door of light, passing through it. His figure disappeared behind the door that had the unknown hidden behind. The cracked cocoons were still gently swaying.